Hi, this is Daniel Schleichel, Director of Implementations at Axiom Human Resource Solutions. I'd like to welcome you to Payroll Processing Training. In this training session, we're going to take an in-depth look at how to process payroll in the Workforce Ready system. Your actual payroll process may differ slightly, but the steps we're going to look at are, in general, those typically used. Let's get started. We are currently logged into our demo company as Kathy Watts, who is the payroll processor in this company. And to start the process, she's actually going to, from her dashboard here, go into the Start widget, hover over the Payroll block, and choose Process Timesheets. This is going to take us to the Process Timesheets page, and you can also use the menu here at the top of the screen to come to this exact same page by going to Manage Payroll, Manage Payrolls, Process Timesheets. So again, exact same place. And we're going to look at this weekly pay period right here. You'll see that it does show the start date of the pay period, the end date of the pay period, and the actual pay date. So this is the one we're going to work with. In order to get to our time prep list, we're going to click on the pay period functions button, which looks like a $sign and a cog. As you'll see, that does take us to our time prep list. Now, we are going to start with the first step in this list, which is pending time off requests. If there are any time off requests that have been made for this pay period that have not been approved yet, it will show here. So it does look like we have one unapproved time off request for this pay period. So we can either click here in the header, or we can click down in this message below to actually see that time off request. We can see that our employee Casey Jones made that request for Friday, June 8th. And it hasn't been approved yet. So at this point, you can either have, whomever's supposed to approve that request, approve it, or it can actually be done here too. So if you want to approve it yourself, you can check that box. We can say approve, check request. Okay, approve, and now it's been approved. So we can go back to our list, no longer have any pending time off requests. And then at this point, if you want to check off this item saying that we're done, you can click on the box here. It'll say that it was completed by, whoever's completing it, the date and the time that it was completed. Personally, I don't check those boxes off myself, but if that helps you remember where you are in the process, then go ahead and do so. Our next two steps here are review timesheet status and approve timesheet status. So review will actually show you all of the timesheets in the pay period that have not been approved. So if they are in an approval state other than approved, they're going to show up here. So we have lots of open timesheets listed on here. I think near the bottom here, we have some that haven't been opened either. So that's what you're going to see on this screen. As we can see here, we do see that Casey does have 40 hours in her timesheet, but it actually hasn't been approved yet. If we go back a screen and we go to approve timesheet status, you would actually be able to approve all of your timesheets from this screen. Now, if there are timesheets that you're not responsible for, they won't show up here. But any of them that you're responsible for and haven't been approved yet, you can actually come here to approve those. Okay, so let's assume that we have all of our timesheets ready to go and everything's ready to be processed. We're going to click on this next step here, which is process records. And what that is actually going to do is take those hours from the timesheet and get them into the format needed for payroll. So the only thing we have to do for that is click on Process Records and then tell the system to run the process. Okay, so we ended up with a number of errors here. It looks like most of those are due to a missing pay prep profile. So in this case, we're not too worried about those. If you do see some errors, the ones that you would probably be concerned about would say missing E/D code, which means that one of your pay categories in the timesheets is not tied to an earning or deduction code on the payroll side of things, which in that case, you'd probably want to give us a call and we can help you troubleshoot that and figure that out. And then the other regular one that you would see would be incomplete time entry, which means that someone has a missing punch somewhere. So I'm going to go back again. And our next step down is review results. This is where we can actually click and we can see what the calculated time was taken from the timesheet. So in this case, Casey's the only one that's going to have any time. And we can see that Casey had 30 regular hours and 8 vacation hours on her timesheet. It does also show us the errors that we received as well, so you'll see those down below. But mainly in this case, what we're concerned about is the time that was taken from the timesheet. Now, one of the nice things about this page is if you need to verify some information, it does have a link here, the Open Timesheet link, where you can jump directly into the employee's timesheet. All right, so let's go back again. Our next step is going to be the lock pay period step. So what this does is this actually locks the timesheets and prevents them from being edited any further from anybody. So that means that you won't be able to edit the timesheets, managers won't be able to edit the timesheets, and even those of us here at Axiom won't be able to edit the timesheets. Now, that sounds, pretty dire, but you can always unlock it, and we'll go over that here in a second as well. So we click lock pay period. It'll ask us if we want to lock it. We say yes. And it will now say down here in this box that the pay period is locked. So again, if we go into our review results and we go back to Casey's timesheet here, we'll see that everything's grayed out and we actually can't make any changes here because as it says right here, the timesheet is now read only. But if you're looking through things and something does need to be changed, you can always unlock the pay period at this point, and really any point during the payroll process as long as you haven't submitted the payroll. And to do that, you'll just click Unlock Pay Period. So this is the same step where we locked it. Just click Unlock Pay Period. It'll ask you if you want to unlock. Before you say yes, check this box that says Include Unlocking of All Accounts Within Pay Period, because you can actually unlock the pay period itself but leave the employee's timesheets locked. So to actually unlock those employee timesheets, you'll want to check this box before clicking the Yes button. So now our pay period is unlocked again. So once again, if we click Review Results and we go back and take a look at Casey's timesheet, it's open for edit once again. Okay. So after locking the pay period, your next step will be go to Payroll Prep. So essentially we're done with the time prep at this point, and we'll be starting the actual payroll process. So we'll go to Payroll Prep, and this is going to take us to the Payroll Prep list. So very similarly to the time prep list, this is the Payroll Prep is another list that will guide you through the payroll process. Our very first step here is go to time prep, so you can actually jump back and forth between the two different lists here. So payroll prep is at the bottom of the time prep list, and time prep is at the top of the payroll prep list. Now, the very first thing that you'll want to do here on the payroll prep list is actually initiate payroll. Now, for you, the initiate payroll box should pop up automatically. Here in the demo company, it's not, so we'll actually click initiate payroll. But when you actually come into payroll, this box should come up automatically for you. Okay, so in this box, this is the initiate payroll box. What you're going to see a couple of options here. And what we're really concerned with is having this first checkbox checked off that says create all unassigned pay period, and then a pay statement type of regular. So what does that mean? Basically what that's saying is that everyone, all of your employees who are associated with this specific pay period, we're going to create a regular pay statement for them. After you do this for your very first payroll, as long as this box is checked and that says regular, it will actually default those settings in every payroll thereafter. So it's only really the very first payroll that you run where you'll have to check that checkbox and choose regular for the pay statement type. So at this point, we're going to come down here to the bottom of the box. We're going to click this Create Now button. After we click this, you'll see here in the Initiate Payroll step that payroll is being initialized. So it's actually adding in these pay statements right now. And what this does when these pay statements are created is it's bringing in any scheduled earnings. So that would be salaries, that might be some, like phone allowances, car allowances, any regular reimbursements, stuff like that. It's bringing those in on the pay statements as they're created. It's also bringing in scheduled deductions, so medical, dental, vision, 401k, whether traditional or Roth, or any other sort of retirement deduction, garnishments, child support, anything of that nature. Those are also being brought in when the pay statements are created. Now, the only thing that's not being brought in would be any of the hours from the timesheets, and that's going to occur in our next step, which is sync time. So just as soon as these pay statements are done, we will look at our sync time step, which is going to bring in those hours from the timesheets. So while this is working, I wanted to also point out the other way that you can get to the payroll prep list right here. And that's, again, going through the menu system here under Manage Payroll, Manage Payrolls. In this case, the very bottom option, View All Payrolls. So if you click on that, you'll be brought to I think the default view is last and current months are the payrolls that it shows. So in this case, we're looking at this pay period right here. This would be our weekly payroll, pay date of 6/15, and that's the one we can see right now that the payroll is initializing right here, so we can tell that that's the one we're working on. So again, just like with going into the time prep list, we're going to click on this payroll prep process button, the $ at the cog, and that will again take us to our payroll prep list. Okay, so we can see now that our payroll has been initiated. We have 175 employees in this payroll, and all of their pay statements have been created. So as I stated before, our next step is going to be sync time. So in order to do that, we just click on our header here, sync time. We're going to check this box because this is going to be for our time batch over in the timesheets. And then we're going to click the button near the top right here that says sync time. It's going to take us back to the payroll prep list, and we'll see here in our sync time step that time is being synced. And that actually worked pretty quickly. We'll see that the sync was performed once, and it tells you the last time it happened. And now we're ready to move on. So at this point, all of our pay statements have been created. All of the time has been brought over from the timesheets and synced to the pay statements. So now we're ready to start looking things over and making any additional changes that need to be made to the pay statements. And there's two different ways we can do that. We can do that through Add Edit Batches, and we can do that through Add Edit Pay Statements. We'll start with Add Edit Batches here. And we'll see here that we actually have each row here is for a different batch. So the top row is actually all of the information brought over from the timesheet. So that batch was created when we did the sync time step. And generally, we're not going to view or edit this batch. The one that we're concerned with is the regular earnings batch. That's the batch that's created when you actually initiate payroll. So to actually open this batch and view it and make edits, we'll click on this first icon, which is the Open Batch for Edit icon. And you'll see when this batch is open that more or less each employee has one row. And then what you'll find in the columns are going to be the earnings, the earning amounts, earning hours, deduction amounts. You can bring in tax amounts. Really, anything like that is going to be our column. So there are a couple of things that that this view is good for. If you have a whole bunch of hours, or maybe you have a smaller payroll and you're just entering all of your hourly employees' hours, right? This is a really good place where you can come in and you could say, well, Andrew worked 40 regular hours and he had 5 overtime hours. And then we can say that Noah had 32 hours this week, and we could, Casey we won't mess with because we actually had time in her timesheet. But we could say Tom, maybe had 15 regular hours, and so on and so forth. So this is a really good view to actually enter hours for employees, either if you don't have timekeeping, or you just have, like I said, a relatively small payroll. Another thing that this view is really good for is if we go to select columns, we'll look for our bonus amount column. I'm going to just add that in front of everything here. So another thing that this is really good for is adding bonuses to employees. So say it's, say it's getting towards the end of the year, you have a whole bunch of bonuses to pay out to people. You can come into this view, you can bring in the bonus column, and we can just, go right down the column adding in the bonuses for people. Just like that. So after you have made some changes to the batch, if you want to save these changes in the batch itself, you'll just want to click the Save button here in the row of buttons, the first one, and that will save the changes to the batch itself. So now you can see that these are kind of grayed out a little bit, meaning that they've been saved. If you want to actually take those changes and put them on the pay statements themselves. So right now this is saved in the batch, but these bonus amounts aren't going to show up in actual payroll yet, or on the actual pay statements. So to make those show up on the pay statements, you'll want to click on this second button, which is Save and Update Payroll. So you do that, it's going to give you this like dire warning, this operation cannot be undone. Well, I mean, you can always go back and you can erase anything you've put in this batch. So it's kind of a silly warning, but that's what it does. So we'll say okay, and by doing that, those bonuses that I've entered have now been entered on these employees' pay statements. And you can actually view this, so we can view Andrew's pay statement by clicking on this first button here, which is the Edit Pay Statement button. And we'll see here on his pay statement, we now have this bonus. So that wasn't there until we clicked the Save and Update Payroll button. Okay, so the last step you need to do after you've put in all of your changes here in the Add Edit Batches screen is actually close this batch out, because you can't, if you have a batch open, you actually can't go further in the payroll process. You can't close your payroll or make edits under Add Edit Pay Statements with a batch open. So to close that batch, you just have to click the Close Batch button right here. Say OK, and our batch is now closed. We're going to go back to screen now, and we're going to check out the second way to edit pay statements, which is Add Edit Pay Statements. So from this screen, the screen will look a little different. Again, each employee, actually in this case, is each pay statement will get its own row. And then in the columns, you'll see gross total, deductions total, taxes total, and net payment. If the employee has any errors, those will show up too, and any warnings will show up as well. So you can get some really nice, total information from this page. And then the other thing that you can do is we can jump directly into an employee's pay statement by clicking the View Edit Pay Statement button, this first icon right here. And this will look familiar. We just saw Andrew's pay statement. So from here, we can add earnings, deductions, and taxes for a specific employee's pay statement. So in this case, any of the changes we make on here will be just for Andrew. So in this case, let's go ahead. We'll give Andrew some regular hours. We'll say that he had, I go back to the hours column. We'll say he had 40 regular hours, and we'll say he had 5 overtime hours. So once you've made, you've entered your changes, you'll click the Save button up here at the top. And then that will go ahead, if you're entering hours, that'll actually go ahead and bring in the employee's base rate and go ahead and calculate that amount out for you. From here, there are a couple of different things that we can do. We can preview Andrew's pay statement. So in this case, we can see, at the very top here, we have a direct deposit voucher. Underneath that, we have our earnings section, which shows his rate, his hours, his current earnings, and his year-to-date earnings with the gross pay at the bottom. We have his deductions. We have the tax section here, so federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, Indiana state income tax, and his county tax. Taxable wages for this pay period, his taxable wages year-to-date, the current taxes being taken out of his gross pay up here, and then his year-to-date taxes for each tax type, and the total amount of taxes being taken out right here. And underneath that, we just have his net pay. So that's why he's actually going to be paid this pay period. Underneath that would be any company paid benefits. So that would include deductions like medical, 401k matches, anything like that. We also have federal unemployment, federal Social Security, federal Medicare, and then any state unemployment as well. Other things that can be included on the pay statement would be their tax allowances. So, whether they've elected, single, married, head of household, and then, the number of allowances they've chosen with that. PTO balances can be included on here as well. So if you want that, just ask. But that would be the preview pay statement. Now, these can be downloaded at any time. Just click the download PDF button. It'll bring up a download box. You just put it where you want it to go. We're going to go ahead and close that. So then a couple of other things you can do here in Add Edit Pay Statements. We can actually go to Utilities and we can choose Options. And here's one that's actually very useful. This very first box in the second section here, it shows direct deposit. So typically Andrew gets a direct deposit. Well, maybe this time he doesn't want a direct deposit. You can actually zero out his direct deposit. We can say Apply Changes and save. And now if we preview, we'll see that Andrew's actually getting a live check. So typically those checks would print out here and we either ship them to you or mail them to the employee, whatever, however you want that to occur. But in this case, that's how you can actually prevent the employee from getting a direct deposit and receive a live check instead. Another thing that can be done, we can go to Utilities, we go to Tax Overrides Advanced right here, and we can override the amount of taxes taken out along with the taxable wage amounts. Typically, the taxable wage amounts you'll want to leave alone, but there are sometimes, especially in the cases of bonus checks, where maybe maybe the employee doesn't want to have any federal income tax taken out. Maybe they don't want to have any state income tax taken out. Maybe they don't want to have any county tax taken out. So you can go ahead, you can check the box for override and then either put in the different amount that you want to override it with, or just clear it out for nothing. So then we can hit Apply Changes here. We say Leave when that box comes up, and then we save our changes again. And now when we preview, if we scroll down to our taxes withheld, we'll see that the federal income tax has been zeroed out, along with state income tax and county tax. So the only two taxes being taken out are Social Security and Medicare. So those are two really useful utilities that you can do here under Add Edit Pay Statements. Okay, before we move on, I wanted to touch on another thing you can do here, which is create a new pay statement. So if we click on our Create New Pay Statement button on our pay statement list screen here, you can see that we can add pay statements for single or multiple employees, and that we can choose a number of pay statement types. And what I really wanted to focus on here is a manual pay statement. This is useful for a lot of clients, particularly our clients in California. So let's go ahead. Let's make a manual pay statement for Andrew here. We'll say okay. So in this case, let's say, for whatever reason, maybe he's being paid 40 hours in advance. Okay, so there is his pay. Now, at this point, after you've put in the earnings and any deductions that you need, you'll want to come up here to where it says check number. Switch this to manual. Make sure your bank account shows in the drop-down box here. It should by default. And then go ahead and put in the check number for the check you're going to write for the employee. So in this case, let's say it's check number 1005. And then whatever date you write the check on, make sure that that's the check date here. So at that point, you'll want to click Save. And our manual check is done. Now, a couple of things we recommend you do after you complete these manual checks. One good best practice is to actually preview the manual check. Go ahead and download it, and either we recommend keeping a folder of those on your computer, a folder of the manual checks, or go ahead, print it out, and keep it in an actual file folder, somewhere in your office. Just so in case, something ever happens, you actually have a record of that check right after you've made it. Because the next thing we recommend, let's go ahead, we're going to search for manual checks here. Okay, so the other thing we recommend that you do is after you get done creating that manual check in the system, is finding it, coming to Utilities, and saying Close Selected Pay Statements. The system's going to tell you that you're about to close one pay statement. Let's say close the manual pay statements. This is a box you'll have to do extra for the manual pay statements, but go ahead and check that. Say Close. So now this pay statement is closed, and you actually can't make any more edits. And what this is important for, so you see I can click away here, and it's not going to do anything for me. What this is important for is that if there are any changes made to Andrew's Andrew's profile, or there are any tax changes in the system itself, if pay statements are recalculated in payroll, then this manual check will not be affected. So the amount actually paid out to the employee could change if this pay statement isn't closed and something is updated and pay statements are recalculated. So anytime you create one of these manual pay statements, you'll want to close it just as soon as you're done. Otherwise, the amount could change, and then what's processed through payroll could have a mismatched amount with what's actually paid out to the employee. So that's why we really recommend that right after you get done with it, you at least save and print out a copy of that pay statement or save it to your desktop somewhere, and then for sure close that manual pay statement. All right, so I think at this point we're kind of done making all of our changes. So we're going to go back to our payroll prep list here. We're going to scroll down a little bit. Next step is sign off on open alerts. So if you have any open alerts that that the system is bringing to your attention in the payroll itself, you'll be able to click on the header here or the alerts below there in order to help deal with those alerts. In this case, we don't have any, but the regular ones you would see is if you have a terminated employee in the payroll, which, if the employee was terminated during that pay period, they're going to come into payroll. But the system will notify you that, hey, this is a terminated employee in payroll. Another regular one that you might see, especially for our folks in Indiana, would be if you hire a new employee and you don't have to put in their county taxes if you don't want to. The system will automatically add their county taxes, and then it will have an alert saying, hey, we added Marion County tax, we added Hamilton County tax, we added whatever. So there will be alerts for each county added to each employee. And essentially to get rid of those, you can either, check off the check boxes and mark a lot of them as completed at the same time, or each individual one will have a little flag that you can click on to do each one at a time. All right, so our next step here is our pre-process payroll step. Essentially what this is the close payroll step. The system's actually not going to allow me to do this. Let's do this real first. So I'm going to actually find out which pay statements have errors. Not sure why all these pay statements have errors. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to delete them so we can get rid of all of our errors. So please select the pay statements. We're going to say yes. Because if you have any pay statements with errors, the system actually won't let you close the payroll until those errors are taken away or are gotten rid of or have been taken care of. So now if we scroll down here, we'll see that we just have 2 warnings. Now the warnings, so if we click on that, our warnings here, so 2 of our employees don't actually live in the unemployment state that they're paying for, but that's okay. So the warnings, you can still close payroll without taking care of those, but the errors you cannot. So let's go ahead. We're going to say close payroll. It's going to ask us if we'd like to close payroll and lock pay statements. So very similarly to locking the pay period, very similar to locking the pay period, if we close payroll, you can't make any more edits to the pay statements. However, you can reopen payroll in order to make more edits if you need to. So once you close payroll, it's not the end of the world yet. You can still reopen, make more changes, and then close payroll after that. Now, we did get an error saying that another payroll is being processed. It's actually from April of this year. So I'm guessing that payroll was probably closed or submitted and has never been finalized. So let's actually go look at that. And this is actually a really good point in that if you're working on multiple pay periods at the same time, if you actually close one of them, you won't be able to close another one. Okay, so it looks like, see, this one had 3 errors that were not taken care of, and when it was closed, the system actually stopped it because it can't close pay statements with errors. So we're just going to say cancel and open. All right, so it's going to open this payroll back up. Going to go back to our menu here. Okay, let's go back into our pay prep list. So now we should be able to click close payroll, say okay. And now the system is going to close our payroll. Okay, so you can see here that we actually had a lot of empty pay statements that were deleted. So if you have a pay statement that doesn't have any earnings on it, it will actually go ahead and delete those for you. The only exception being if that pay statement has employer paid benefits. So if it has, medical insurance is paid by the company, it won't delete those. But if it's just an empty pay statement, no earnings, no employer paid benefits, it's going to delete that pay statement. So we can see now that we have 24 pay statements for 23 employees because Andrew has both a regular and a manual pay statement. Now we can continue on. We can go to check our totals, which is broken down into 3 sections again, our deductions, earnings, and taxes, where you can just see each deduction, earning, or tax type, total amount on the employer side, total amount on the employee side, and then total amount on the employer side if there is any. It also shows hours for earnings if there are hours, and then quantity for earnings as well if there are pieces. So this is just a really quick overview of the totals for each one. So we can see here, this is total tax amount, or I'm sorry, total deduction amount, total earning amount, total tax amount, and then total overall. So that was check your totals. Next step you may or may not have. Our next step here is run accruals. So if you are keeping track of your time off accruals in our system, there are two different ways that the accruals can process. The system can either run them on its own, so whether that's every year, every month, every pay period, what have you, the system can do that on its own for the most part. The only time that it can't is if you have hours-based accrual. So if you're, if you have some rate that you're multiplying by a number of hours worked in a pay period or in a week or something like that, then you actually have to manually execute the accruals. That's what this step would be. And in order to do that, you would just click the Execute Accruals button right here, or the hyperlink. It's going to ask you if you want to execute for this pay period. You can say okay. And it will actually process and add in new accrual amounts for the employees. So it'll show all the employees who are processed and if they received an amount or not. Let's change this just to look at people who actually receive stuff. So we got a lot of sick time, 0.04, 0.06 hours, stuff like that. So now everyone's accruals should be updated. And we can move on to our view payroll step. This is basically where you're going to view preview reports if you would like. The two preview reports that just about everybody likes to see would be the payroll register by PST, which basically shows an earning, deduction, tax, and net breakdown for each pay statement in the system. So here we can see Andrew has two. Typically it's just one per employee because most of the time employees only have one pay statement, but in this case Andrew has two because we can see his regular pay statement right here. And then we can see his manual pay statement right underneath that. You can come here, you can view this, you can scroll up here, click the export button and download a PDF copy. You can also get an Excel copy, but in this case, this report doesn't look so good in Excel, so we usually recommend PDF for this one. And this is a really good way to just go back through and make sure, that everyone's earnings, deductions, and pay looks, relatively correct. If you don't want to go through with a fine-tooth comb, I don't blame you there, but this is at least a pretty easy way to make sure everything looks like it's on the up and up. And then the other report that is probably the other one that most people like to see as well would be the Payroll Recap and Funding report. So it says Payroll Recap Funding right here. We'll just click on that. And what this does is this is just kind of like a payroll overview report. It shows you, so in this case we see employee payments, right? We see that the Axiom is actually going to debit for $3,896.24, but we also have 3 checks in the amount of $10,000, $10,100.11 the Axiom will not debit for. We see our tax amount. So it's broken down to each type of tax. And the total here, $5,669.51. We see vendor liabilities. In this case, none of these vendors are being invoiced by Axiom, so this is really more for your information than anything. However, if you do see an I, that means that it's going to be invoiced by Axiom, so that's an amount that we would debit from you. Or if you see a D, like the direct deposits up here, that means it's going to be debited from you. So if it's invoiced, that means it shows up on the invoice and it's debited with the invoiced amount. If it says D, that means it's just going to be a direct debit for that amount. Either way, it's going to be something that we take from you. Finally, you'll see a total down here. In this case, the total isn't quite right. It doesn't actually update until you submit payroll. But in this case, in order to find out, what Axiom is going to debit you, you would add this this debit amount for the direct deposits. You would add in this amount for the taxes, and then whatever your administration fee from Axiom would be, you can add that in too. But that won't be nearly as much as what the employee, your employee payments and your taxes would be. So you can get a a decent idea of how much your payroll is going to cost just by looking at this screen. All right, so at this point, we're kind of at the end of our payroll process here. We've brought all of the time over from the timesheets. We've made our changes and added batches, added pay statements. We ran our accruals. We've looked over everything. Everything looks good. So then the last thing you'll want to do is click the Submit Payroll button. You click that, asks you if you want to submit the current payroll. You say OK, and it'll tell you that payroll was submitted. So at this point, what that does is that will have the system shoot off an email to our payroll inbox, payroll@axiomhrs.com, where it will notify all of the payroll processors that you've submitted your payroll, that it's ready to go. So then the last thing that we do on our end is called Finalize and Deliver. And basically what that does is when the finalization step would be creating the ACHs that will go out. So the ACHs would be those that debit the funds from your bank account and then deposit it into our bank account. And then also ACHs that would debit our bank account and put direct deposits into the employees' accounts. There are other debits that go along too, like debiting taxes, from your account, and we take those. Sometimes there are garnishments or child supports where we take the money and then ACH it to. The best case would be we ACH Indiana child support to the state of Indiana, so that they can get that right away. But that's what's done during finalization. ACHs are created at that point. And then the delivery would be any reports that are set to be mailed out with payroll. That's the delivery step. So by default, we send out a final payroll register by pay statement. So when we looked at previously, we send out a finalized one of those. And we also send out a finalized payroll recap and funding. Now, you can also, if there are some reports that you like to receive that you've created or you've had us create, that you also want to receive when payroll is finalized, you can actually do that yourself. It's actually pretty easy. So if you have a saved report that you'd like to be delivered with payroll, you come to My Reports, My Saved Reports here. So let's say that we want to see, let's just say our time off calendar here. What you'd want to do is click on the second icon, the edit icon. It's supposed to look like a piece of paper with a pencil. So you click on that. It'll bring up the edit report setting, and you'll want to check this box that says deliver with payroll. So check that. Choose the delivery policy, which in this case doesn't look like we have any, but it'll say something like reports emailed or emailed reports, something along those lines. Those are typically what we use. So you'll choose that. You'll choose your report format. In this case, this report's a little limited, but we'd probably just want to stick with PDF here. Most of the other ones you can also choose Excel, the Excel format as you know. And then you would just want to save, and then every time that delivery is started on a payroll, it'll actually email that report to you as well. Okay, well that is going to finish up our payroll processing training here. I hope that you found this informative. And of course, if you get stuck along the way or you have any questions as you're going along, we will be more than happy to help you out. So thank you very much for your time today. Goodbye.